began our journey amid the relentless rhythm of a city that never sleeps. A current of hurried bodies moved through the concrete arteries, each face reflecting a private battle fought in silence. The morning commute is often portrayed as merely a passage from one point to another. Yet for those who ride within its noise and crush, it becomes something far more profound, a confrontation with ourselves. We carry our lives not just on our backs, but within the noisy chambers of our minds. And today, that mind was full of yesterday's anxieties, tomorrow's unformed worries, and the sharp, piercing urgency of things we thought we needed to remember. It is here, in the cacophony of blaring horns and hurried footsteps, that the modern mind begins its insidious task. It learns to absorb external chaos as if it were personal affront. We become experts at reaction. Every unexpected brake screech feels like a personal delay. Every sudden burst of laughter on the platform seems to demand our participation, requiring us to shed our internal composure for a fleeting moment of misplaced engagement. This overwhelming barrage convinces us that our emotional state is dictated by the immediate environment. The noise becomes a narrative told directly to our souls. You are late. You are stressed. You are not enough. I recall moments like this, trapped amidst the tide of humanity, feeling utterly powerless against the sheer weight of surrounding kinetic energy. My attention was fragmented, bouncing off the metal walls and the impermeable glass. I found myself reciting minutes, calculating delays, and mentally drafting responses to emails that had not even arrived yet. The external disorder seemed to seep inward, colonizing my thoughts until they were nothing but a series of reactive inputs. Observe brake lights, calculate risk, anticipate delay. The philosopher observing this scene would point out something crucial, something simple, yet overwhelmingly difficult in practice. It is the fundamental confusion between stimulus and response. The noise itself, the blare, the jostle, the crowd, is merely a natural phenomenon of densely populated life. Yet we have mistakenly treated these neutral occurrences as judgments upon our inner selves. We mistake the fact that a bus was delayed for the inherent failure of our own planning or disposition. We treat the impersonal chaos of the city as if it were a personal failing in our character. There is a deeper lesson embedded in this morning's struggle, one that modern life actively works to obscure with notifications and advertisements. It is about ownership of attention. Are we spending our most precious resource, our focused consciousness, on things we cannot possibly control? The screeching metal rail or the aggressive horn blast are entirely external. They originate from factors beyond the sphere of my will. Yet, I was arranging my entire mental architecture around anticipating and reacting to them. This is where the early seeds of the philosophical shift must be sown. If chaos is unavoidable, if the noise, the hurry, the unexpected delay are merely ingredients in the stew of human existence, then where does true power reside? It cannot lie in changing the external world, for that task is Sisyphean and beyond our individual capacity. True power, I gradually realized, resides solely within the space between the stimulus and my subsequent reaction. That infinitesimal gap of time is not merely a pause, it is the arena of freedom. The initial challenge was terrifying because it required dismantling decades of learned habit. It meant recognizing that the very instinct to flinch, to brace oneself against emotional turbulence, was itself a form of poor judgment. To become mindful in such an environment is to practice a radical detachment, not apathy, but profound intellectual distance. To observe the torrent without being swept away by its force, we must learn to distinguish between what merely happens and what we subsequently assume about what has happened. The incident of the crowded subway car becomes simply the action of many people occupying a confined space, stripped of the accompanying narrative. I am cornered. I am inconvenienced. This is wrong. This simple reframing allowed a slow, steady current of calm to seep back into my awareness. It was not achieved by escaping the city, but by refusing to let the city enter and dominate the quiet inner landscape. We are taught that to be modern is to be reactive. Stoicism teaches us that to be free is to be contemplative. The hardest journey does not lie across continents, but within the mind itself. And only by mastering this internal architecture can we hope to navigate the inescapable noise of life with genuine serenity. The modern world has perfected the art of making us feel perpetually incomplete, eternally behind. It whispers constant demands into the quiet moments between thoughts. The chime of a notification is no longer merely a sound. It is an imperative, an undeniable call to action. We have built lives governed not by deep reflection or measured choice, but by the erratic rhythm of the inbox and the frantic blinking of the headline feed. Every ping, every glowing screen convinces us that there is some vital crisis unfolding elsewhere, requiring our immediate attention. This constant pull creates a fabricated urgency, weaving itself into the very fabric of modern identity. It feels as if we have traded genuine engagement with life for the illusion of perpetual readiness. Our worth seems to be measured by our responsiveness, how fast we can reply, how many crises we can juggle before sundown. We mistake volume for importance. We confuse noise for meaning. The relentless digital tide never subsides. It crests and retreats, washing over us in a tsunami of urgent markers. And in the face of this unending flow, the natural human tendency is simply to react, to jump, to become another frantic participant in the great theater of manufactured panic. He finds himself immersed in this undertow. His office cubicle, once merely a workspace, has become an echo chamber for external demands. The screen glows with an array of tasks, each item demanding a portion of his finite attention. These notifications are designed to bypass thoughtful consideration. They aim straight for the amygdala, triggering a primal sense of alarm and obligation. To ignore them feels not just inconvenient, but existentially irresponsible, as if failing to reply means failing one's duty to the collective anxiety. He begins to notice the pattern, the genuine necessity, the truly critical task that requires deep thought or profound presence gets drowned out by a steady stream of polite updates and low-stakes demands. These are the digital equivalent of smoke signals. They look dramatic, but they often point only to minor inconveniences. A quiet moment offers a sliver of resistance. He remembers abstract passages on philosophy, verses spoken long ago about accepting what cannot be changed. The principle was simple, powerful, and utterly incompatible with his current reality. The distinction between what is within one's control and what is not. The sheer volume of external digital noise, the tweets from distant capitals, the breaking news cycles from across the globe, the demands from managers in time zones he cannot physically reach, was overwhelmingly outside his sphere of influence. He feels a growing tension between the internal voice advocating for deep calm and philosophical detachment, and the superficial, buzzing mandate of the screen. The old self would have surrendered to the current immediately. It would have optimized its entire existence around mitigating every potential digital crisis. But something is shifting. The sheer effort required to maintain this constant state of alert begins to drain a vital resource: inner peace. The realization dawns slowly, like light breaking through dense cloud cover. This fabricated urgency, this feeling that if he pauses for just one deep breath, everything will collapse, is not an objective truth about the world. It is a construct built by attention economies and perpetual cycles of manufactured alarmism. Marcus Aurelius understood this boundary instinctively. He knew that most things we perceive as urgent are merely habitual distractions, requiring only our temporary agreement to their perceived importance. He begins, almost experimentally, to categorize these incoming stimuli. Each email subject line is opened not with anxiety, but with a simple act of classification. Is this truly necessary? Does its immediate resolution genuinely alter my core well-being or trajectory? Often, the answer was no. It would either resolve itself by morning, or it concerned someone else's minor logistical difficulty. The internal monologue becomes a disciplined exercise in resistance. Instead of thinking, I must respond now, instead, he gently rephrases, perhaps this requires careful consideration later, when my focus is fully dedicated to the task at hand. The action itself remains. The reply will eventually go out, but the emotional charge attached to it is systematically diffused. He is performing a subtle act of mental triage. This mental separation is exhausting, far more difficult than simply clicking send. It requires acknowledging that while the notifications themselves are merely data packets, his reaction to them carries weight, the self-imposed penalty of guilt, distraction, and missed deep work. He realizes that by repeatedly responding instantly, he was effectively signaling to himself and everyone else that a frantic pace equated to competence. He was participating in an unexamined cultural ritual. Slowly, tentatively, the hand hovering over the send button hesitates. The physical act of resistance feels monumental, but its necessity is profound. He practices intentional space between stimulus and response. It is the breath he takes before clicking read. It is the pause between seeing a flashing red subject line and feeling the immediate surge of panic about its content. This moment of deliberate non-reaction becomes his new pillar of strength. The digital tide is still roaring, demanding sacrifices of time and attention, but for the first time, he sees the power in simply watching the wave come and go, observing its force without being swept away by it. He begins to treat the stream of constant alerts not as a set of commandments, but as merely environmental background noise, like the distant hum of traffic or the repetitive call of city vendors. It exists, yes, but it no longer dictates his internal rhythm. This chapter is a profound descent into the architecture of attention itself. Understanding that true freedom lies in withdrawing the self from the perpetual drama of manufactured crisis and reciting, instead, within the disciplined quietude of judgment. The city presses in on him, a relentless pressure, an invisible force that demands continuous motion and instant response. He walked away from the buzzing screens and the manufactured urgency of the office. The noise of traffic, once a personal affront, felt distant now, like a river roaring far away from his immediate self. He found himself at the edge of something ancient, a sprawling wall of sun-baked stone, part of a forgotten fortification. It rose up behind overgrown shrubs, solid and indifferent to the frantic rhythm of modern life. Standing before it was a physical manifestation of permanence, a stark contrast to the liquid chaos surrounding him. The silence here was not empty, it was weighted with centuries. It demanded nothing, yet offered everything, a space for profound stillness. He leaned his back against the cool, rough surface of the stone and simply breathed. This wasn't just physical rest. It felt like a philosophical reset button pressed by history itself. His thoughts began to drift, tracing lines across the texture of the wall lines that represented time, endurance, and unyielding structure. He thought of the people who had passed this very spot through different ages, soldiers marching to war, merchants haggling over goods, simple villagers taking a moment's rest. None of them were distracted by notifications or deadlines. They simply existed within the flow of their own unfolding reality. The modern condition, he realized, was a state of perpetual distraction. We treat life as an endless queue of stimuli requiring immediate judgment. An email pings, react. A delay occurs, judge it bad. A stranger brushes past, analyze the interaction. Our minds have become machines for reaction, perpetually waiting for the next stimulus to define our emotional state. He closed his eyes and focused on a single point, the dichotomy of control. This was the core principle he had glimpsed, but not yet truly absorbed. He separated his experience into two distinct categories. On one side lay everything that happened in this world outside of him: the passing cars, the unpredictable behavior of others, the sudden shift of weather, the arbitrary cruelty of bad luck. These things were external. They were raw events, indifferent to his mood or his will. On the other side was what he controlled: his judgments, his assent, the space between stimulus and response. This internal domain was revealed as a boundless territory, a citadel within his own mind, completely safe from the siege of circumstance. He remembered a quiet reflection on this point, drawn from old texts, that life itself is rarely disrupted by truly unavoidable suffering. It is usually disrupted by our judgment of that suffering. The immediate sound of car horns and sirens seemed to fade into the background, becoming merely auditory data points rather than threats requiring emotional energy. He was practicing non-assent. He observed a child chase pigeons nearby, laughing uncontrollably. The natural event was simple playfulness. His initial reaction might have been impatience, a fleeting judgment about wasted time or irresponsible joy, but now he merely watched it. He recognized the emotion, acknowledged its existence, and allowed it to pass without attaching moral weight or personal outrage to it. The ancient wall became his teacher. It stood in seasons of violence and periods of peaceful decline. It endured rain, sun, neglect, and reinvention. It did not rage against these forces, nor did it desperately seek to repel them. It simply was. Its stability came from its sheer refusal to engage with the passing chaos. It embodied perfect non-reaction. He began to mentally structure this principle for implementation. The goal was not emotional detachment. That suggests a cold numbness, a withdrawal of self. No, the goal was something more robust: mindful engagement coupled with internal sovereignty. He wasn't meant to become invisible or indifferent to human needs. Instead, he needed to create an unbreakable boundary around his inner peace, allowing the demands of the outside world to wash against it without ever penetrating its core structure. He realized that much of modern suffering is self-imposed. It stems from the attempt to force reality to conform to our expectations, or worse, from needing external validation for our internal worth. When he stopped trying to control outcomes, when he let go of the need for a specific result, whether professional success, social approval, or even the perfect timing of his lunch break, a profound lightness settled over him. The burden lifted with startling suddenness. The weight of expectation, whether self-imposed or projected by others, had been the invisible chains binding him. By acknowledging that he could only control his readiness to accept what life gave him, he regained immense freedom. He was unbound by the dictates of other people's schedules, moods, or panicked needs. His time, therefore, belonged only to himself and his deliberate philosophy. Stepping away from the cool embrace of the wall, he felt subtly changed. The chaos of the city had not lessened. It continued its relentless rhythm. But now, he walked through it differently. He no longer experienced it as a series of personal attacks or unavoidable misfortunes. It was simply raw input, a constant stream of data, points to be noticed, understood, and then consciously released. This pause at the ancient wall had gifted him not an answer, but a refined method, a profound ability to take his necessary distance from the turmoil, allowing only wisdom to dictate his next step. The practice of wisdom is not a grand philosophical pronouncement made in solitude. It is the subtle architecture of response built into the mundane moments, the places where our guard drops and our true selves are exposed. We have spent time recognizing the sources of our turmoil, the overwhelming current of notifications, the relentless noise of the commute, the seductive illusion that our value depends on our immediate reply. But knowledge, by itself, is merely a map. It does not guarantee safe passage across chaotic terrain. Returning to the minor conflicts of daily life, we must now move beyond observation and into action, into the difficult space of choice. When conflict arises, whether in an office meeting or over a seemingly trivial disagreement with a colleague, our instinctual response is often a defensive reflex. We are trained from childhood to defend boundaries, to argue points, and to react quickly enough to preempt criticism. This readiness for battle costs us dearly, not only draining our energy, but also making us profoundly unstable participants in the drama of others. The ancient lesson we encountered by that solid wall, the necessity of pausing between stimulus and response, is no longer a theoretical exercise. It is a muscle we must consciously flex until it becomes instinctual. The chaos does not stop simply because we decide to ignore it. The other person's frustration, the colleague's impatient tone, the weight of an unspoken demand, these external stressors remain fully potent. Yet, our capacity to be moved by them diminishes. We begin to view these conflicts not as personal affronts, but as unavoidable human conditions. The art of non-reaction is fundamentally the art of radical acceptance, applied only to what we cannot change. It means recognizing that another person's mood, their flawed perspective, or their immediate urgency belongs entirely to them. It does not require agreement, nor does it necessitate complicity. It simply requires a mental step back, viewing the outburst, the drama itself, as an external data point in a continuous stream of human interaction. This practice starts with empathy, but not sentimental pity. True Stoic empathy is recognizing shared vulnerability. We realize that the colleague who seems overly demanding may himself be struggling against some invisible tide of stress or fear. The difficulty lies in remembering this complexity when we feel ourselves being attacked. Our training must therefore extend beyond mere internal stillness. It must manifest as outwardly measured composure. In practice, the pause becomes a disciplined verbal and mental discipline. When the retort is ready to erupt, that immediate surge of defensive justification or irritated dismissal, we insert silence. We allow the moment to stretch out until the reflexive heat has cooled enough for reason to enter. Instead of arguing against the content of their statement, we begin practicing listening to its underlying need. What are they truly afraid of? What stability are they unknowingly seeking? This shift in focus transforms the interaction. The problem is no longer they vs. me, but rather what can I contribute to this moment? We move from reactive opposition to deliberate inquiry. This requires abandoning our need to be right, a surrender that often feels unnatural and even deeply uncomfortable at first. It feels like yielding power when, in fact, we are reclaiming it, the sovereign power of self-determination. The difficult conversations become laboratories for the soul. We learn that true power resides not in the sharpness of our wit or the force of our argument, but in the steady calm maintained while absorbing irrationality. The non-reactive response is often described as being powerfully invisible. It does not cause drama, it diffuses it. Where a defensive reaction creates friction and escalating confrontation, a measured silence combined with simple clarity introduces space for mutual understanding, and more critically, space for oneself. This disciplined self-control becomes less about avoiding feeling and more about choosing the wisdom that governs those feelings. We understand that our emotions are highly volatile messengers, pointing toward misjudgments or unmet expectations. The non-reaction is simply treating these emotional signals with curiosity rather than immediate obedience. It asks us to ask ourselves 3 foundational questions before speaking or acting. Is this necessary? Is it kind? And does it advance my own inner peace? If the answer to any of those questions feels shaky, we pause and remain silent. Building this consistent pattern, this daily rhythm of conscious deceleration, is what forges the mental fortress. It is not a single event or a moment of quiet contemplation that secures us. It is the routine application of philosophical checkpoints throughout the full spectrum of human encounter. The chaos does not disappear because we are thoughtful. We simply stop allowing the surrounding noise, the emotional tides of others, and the demands of modern life to dictate our internal state. our inner peace becomes a self-sustaining generator, fed by these small acts of conscious choice, moment after moment, interaction after difficult interaction. This is the secret, that true freedom arrives not with an escape from difficulty, but with the quiet mastery over one's own center, regardless of how rough the world may become. We have journeyed through the noise of the commute and the relentless pressure of the digital tide. We learned that true power does not come from controlling the external world, but from mastering the space between a stimulus and your response. This principle crystallized for us by an ancient wall, a silent monument to enduring stability amid transient human drama. And in practice, we began to apply this pause, the deliberate moment of breath before judgment, before defense. We learned that most of our suffering is not caused by what happens around us, but by the narratives we construct about what happens around us. Now, the final challenge awaits him. He returns to the sprawling complexity of his daily life. The city has not softened its edges. It remains loud, demanding, and unpredictable. Yet, something deep within him has shifted. The external chaos is still raging, but his internal state no longer mirrors that rage. This transformation was not a sudden epiphany. It was the slow, deliberate work of habit, the formation of an inner routine. The realization struck with quiet clarity. Immunity to disorder is not achieved by escaping it entirely. It requires a profound structural change within himself. His peace will not be found on some distant mountaintop or in forced silence, but in the steady rhythm of self-discipline woven into the fabric of his everyday existence. He understood that freedom was an architectural project requiring daily construction. The first step toward building this inner fortress is vigilance. It demands meticulous routine, a philosophical check-in before he allows himself to be swept away by the momentum of the day. Before opening his eyes, before stepping into the rush hour current, he must pause. He must mentally interrogate his expectations. Are these stressors truly necessary? Is this demand genuinely vital? Or is it merely painted with the urgent myth of modern life? This daily ritual of self-questioning becomes the keystone to his mental sovereignty. At work, the routines are more subtle and require greater endurance. When a colleague presents an inflated complaint, painting failure as a personal betrayal, the old reflex would have been immediate defensive rebuttal. Now, he intercepts that impulse with silence. He practices seeing the outburst not as an attack on himself, but as merely another inevitable human condition, a predictable pattern of flawed emotional processing. By labeling it as such, its emotional charge dissolves before he even speaks. The act of listening, therefore, is transformed. It is no longer a mere collection of waiting words until one can interject. It becomes an active archaeological process, sifting through the spoken complaint to find the core need beneath the layers of drama and finger pointing. He listens for what is truly at stake, distinguishing between actual loss and merely perceived slights. These small moments accumulate, these mini acts of non-reaction, building internal muscle memory. Every time he successfully navigates a moment of frustration by choosing stillness over outburst, he reinforces the walls of his fortress. The routine thus becomes philosophical armor, built block by mental block through conscious choice. The physical environment does not change its nature simply because his mind has changed. The notifications still cascade, the traffic still snarls, human disagreements still flare up with surprising intensity. Yet, where once he was swept into a reactive frenzy by these stimuli, now there is a subtle space, a gap of considered breath, that allows him to observe without participating. He stands outside the drama, viewing the chaos from a point of quiet intellectual distance. This inner fortress is built on the unwavering belief in his own internal authority. It rests on understanding that even if all external pillars crumble, the job, the relationship, the predictable routine, his core philosophical principles remain solid. He realizes that true resilience does not come from never facing difficulty, but from knowing exactly where to find the bedrock of self when everything else shakes. This is Stoic mastery, accepting what cannot be changed and exerting absolute will over how he chooses to interpret it. The journey becomes less about fixing the world and more about perfecting his own internal landscape. His routine shifts from simply completing tasks to executing philosophical checkpoints. Before making a decision, for example, he asks, does this action align with my highest virtue? Is this necessary because it is helpful, or merely because others expect me to perform it? This constant self-audit prevents him from drifting back into the currents of societal obligation or panic. The profound calm that settles over him by the end of a long day is not the absence of trouble. It is the quiet confidence born from having faced the full spectrum of human chaos, the digital noise, the emotional flare-up, the unavoidable inconvenience, and responding only with measured choice. He has done the hardest work, making his inner self reliable. The peace he finds is therefore utterly portable. It travels with him through the roaring streets and within the sterile walls of an office, untouchable by circumstance. This final realization offers a profound redefinition of happiness. It suggests that genuine serenity is not a prize bestowed upon the lucky or the isolated. It is a disciplined skill. It is built moment by moment, decision by decision, through the unwavering commitment to recognizing the space between event and judgment. The inner fortress stands, resilient and quiet, proving that even in the heart of overwhelming modernity, true sovereignty resides always